Welcome, welcome. It is the first of many mock drafts that we are going to have here at hoopball.com. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am your host, Alan Strokey. Happy to be joined today by Zak Hanshew. He is a writer for FantasyPros, and he is plugged into this stuff. Zak, how are you feeling today? How are things looking on your end?
I'm doing great, man. I appreciate you having me on and definitely looking forward to getting started with this mock.
Yep. It is the Yahoo draft room has been open for about 2 weeks now. We are probably most of y'all, when you're watching now, you're probably not getting into your leagues yet, but perhaps after this video, you might feel inclined to do so because Zak and we're going to go through each of these picks that we have here from our collection of HoopBall listeners and a couple of even HoopBall contributors as well, mixed in there as well. Going through all of Yahoo's early ranks, breaking these picks down, going over some specific players as well that Zak and I want to highlight from this early batch here. And it appears that we are loading in on my screen. There's some sort of internet thing, but the stream hasn't cut out yet, so I guess we're still going here. This is, of course, a HoopBall presentation at HoopBall Tweets. You follow them on Twitter. Subscribe to the channel too for more mock drafts and more content that we will be rolling out throughout the off season, getting y'all ready for your fantasy drafts, and just talking hoops generally. It's just going to be a lot of fun. And Zak, you have decided to pick at the turn here. We all had our choice at spots we'd like to draft. This is, by the way, a 9-cat head-to-head mock draft for those of you watching. So Zak, you're going at 12 there. So what was your thought process and for choosing that selection to go at?
Man, I like this spot in fantasy football drafts too. I'm sure a lot of people that are tuning into this, play fantasy football as well. But I like going and having 2 picks back to back. I don't have to, if I pick number 1, I can get Jokic, but then I don't get to pick again until 24. So I don't like that. I like going 2 picks right in a row. And we were talking about this before the stream started, but I mean, shoot, dude, I have the chance to get a combo of PG and Bradley Beal right here at the turn. Maybe Jason Tatum falls a couple of spots. I mean, I can get any number of awesome combinations here to start my team. So, that's what I'm into.
And I totally agree. I've picked we had a HoopBall contributor, real draft that concluded a few days ago, and I was picking at number 2 in that one. And it's tough, man. This year, when you're picking at that turn, once you get to the 23, 24 pick range, you'd be surprised. It gets a little iffy there. I don't know what this thing's struggling to load a little bit, so let's give it another shot. That looks better. That looks good. But yeah, I agree. It is this year, 12 seems to be an actually pretty decent place to draft, particularly with how Yahoo has rolled out these early rankings here. There is a lot. You can walk away with 2 first-round level guys potentially at that spot. Be very interested to see, who ends up falling to you at that position here. I decided to go with number 8 because I'm curious, because there are about 8 guys I'm pretty interested in that I'm curious to see who falls to that position of that batch of 8 that I have in my mind with this particular mock here. Because there's definitely, I think there's some pretty safe bets for your first handful of picks. There's a couple of guys that I think people are projecting big seasons from, like a Karl Anthony Towns and a Jason Tatum. And then you have some risky picks that could be in there too that, maybe they don't play their full allotment of games, but they're putting out top 5 production on a per game basis. So there's a lot of interesting facets. I'm not going to show my hand too early here, but I'll be, particularly if any of the people in the draft room are also listening to the show. Y'all have a slight advantage in that regard, I suppose, if you want to go that route. But yeah, no, that's going to be a lot of fun. I'm very interested to see here. We have MT with the number 1 overall pick here, Zak. In your opinion, is the first pick, you mentioned Jokic as being the top pick, and you feel like that's just sort of a foregone conclusion? That's got to be number 1 this year?
I think it's a foregone conclusion, man. I think the only other guy that's in that top tier that you could make the argument for number 1 overall is going to be Steph Curry. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's anybody else. I think Harden, you could make an argument for him to be, top 3, top 4, whatever you want to say. Yeah. But I think for that top number 1 spot, it's got to be Jokic or Curry, man. I don't see anybody else that comes close to that level.
especially in a head-to-head league where, you need durability from your guys. Jokic is debatably the most durable player in the NBA. Has he even missed one game in the last 2 seasons? I think if he has, it's been one. I mean, the MVP season last year, obviously on just a basis of per game, clear-cut number one, by totals even more so. So I agree that he would strike me as the top choice here. And is the draft room frozen? No, it's not. The draft room is already rolling. I don't know if that was the case on the stream, but it just caught up to me now. And appears like I just wound up with Kevin Durant on auto draft. Are you seeing that, Zach?
I am seeing that, man. Well, I guess they switched it around to default to 30 seconds per pick now because I mean, this thing is just going and going and going.
Well, yeah, we have. Let's take a look here at the top here. We have Jokic going first, Giannis 2, Curry 3, James Harden 4, Karl Anthony Towns at 5, Dame Lillard at 6, Doncic at 7. Durant is someone I'm happy with at 8. And it appears Tatum at 9, Embiid at 10, and now Beal at 11, which we have now to you, Zach. So given everyone who's on the board here, I'm going to see if I can refresh this again just to see if StreamYard will allow us to take a look at this move in motion here.
Yeah, it's an easy one for me, man, with PG. Again, we kind of talked offline a little bit before jumping on here, but I mean, with Kawhi Leonard being out until at least the All-Star break, he's got top 5 potential, dude. I mean, he doesn't really hurt you in any category except maybe blocks. I mean, other than that, he's just loaded across the board. And I think right here, I'm going to go ahead and take. Oh, and it's. Well, you know what? This is. I didn't get it in time. I was talking and the clock was rolling down. So I'm gonna let it go with Anthony Davis here.
It was the fun of doing it live.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. So, I mean, if I was going Paul George, maybe I would go with a pump block strategy or something. But, Anthony Davis came to me next in the, in the queue here. So I'm going to, make do with Anthony Davis. And I don't know, man. What do you think about Davis at 13th? I mean, I think that's right about where I'd feel comfortable taking him. A few spots later, maybe I'd feel a little bit better. But, I mean, after last season, he's kind of risky, right? I mean, he's got that first round value upside, but I mean, do you want to spend that high of a pick on him? I don't know.
Well, I would agree that it's going to be a tough bet this season because Anthony Davis, we all know that he had the injury concerns last year that really, that just took him completely out of rotation entirely. I mean, take a look at these numbers that we have from Anthony Davis last year. Career lows in several categories: rebounds, blocks, field goal percent, free throw percent. I mean, Davis before this year was a top 5 lock in most fantasy drafts. I think that 13 you have a chance to. I wouldn't be surprised if Davis, if he stays healthy this year, he could contend for top 5 value if all things break right, because I really think that there was a lot of elements of his season last year when it came from fatigue from the NBA bubble finals run to just the injury concerns with his Achilles, with the Achilles. It really just some uncharacteristic stuff out of him in a situation where I can't imagine that he'd be bringing out those less than 8 rebounds a game like he did that year, that he would be shooting well below his marks on free throw percentage and field goal percentage. The way that he did is just, to me, it just feels like it was a little bit of an anomaly, what we saw from him. And in your head-to-head draft, I'm not saying that you should draft him in the top 5, but if you wind up with him on the turn like you did, you have a guy who could potentially win you your league if he stays healthy. And we see the blocks get back to 2 a game, and we see the steals hover back to a steal and a half. I mean, Davis, he's still in his prime, and all it takes is for a bout of healthiness for him to really kind of get the ball rolling again. And I'm interested in his potential this year. So I love your first 2 picks. Absolutely.
Well, man, speaking of Lakers, I mean, I see LeBron James went 2 picks later, and that to me seems really high. I mean, I don't see him bringing back top 15 value this season. I think they brought Russell Westbrook in to kind of give James a little time off, kind of lessen the load a little bit, the ball handling responsibilities. I mean, I just can't see him. I mean, he can be maybe a 26-6 guy again. But man, I just don't see those gaudy top 15, top 20. He's outside the top. I think I have him around 25. I just don't see top 20 upside. I mean, do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And it's been a while since LeBron has really turned in a top 20 season, even on a per game basis with dips in percentages and high turnovers. Like, again, we're in 9 category leagues here. Um, like you have to consider that factor as well. And the fact that he can't stay healthy in the way that he used to, mostly just in terms of just preparing him for these lengthy finals trips, it's just a really risky bet. And I would absolutely avoid taking any Laker outside Anthony Davis within that top 14 picks. That includes Russell Westbrook, who, for whatever reason, Yahoo has ranked at 18 at the moment. I don't think there's a prayer of a chance that Westbrook makes good on value at that spot. He has not been a top 15 fantasy player in 9 category leagues really since he won MVP in Oklahoma City. He's a third option in LA now. He's got injury concerns himself. It's a really risky bet to go that high with him.
Yeah, man. And I think that, I mean, just this early going here, I think that really highlights, if you're drafted on Yahoo right now, you can take big advantage of some of these picks right now, because if, somebody that you're drafting with ends up on auto draft, or, maybe just isn't paying attention too much and just drafting based on, these Yahoo ranks. Yeah, Russell Westbrook is maybe a top 60 guy, but he is nowhere near that top 20 just because of the free throw percentage, the threes, the turnovers. And same with Kawhi Leonard here, ranked number 21. The dude's not going to play till, at all, maybe.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely something to highlight right now, is have your rankings ready. Pay attention when you're drafting if you're doing it early, because there's a lot of craziness here on Yahoo, man.
So let's play a little catch up, because I'm still not sure if on what I'm seeing on our screens, what's being reflected in the YouTube page for this draft. We are flying here. Yahoo really did bump the pick time up here. But let's take a look at what we've gotten through here so far. The first round, you're taking a look at that on the screen, right, Zach? You can see the first round picks, all 12 of them right here.
Yeah,
we got, like we said, Jokic and Giannis went 2. A little high for Giannis, but if you're going with a punt free throw build, you can justify that. Let's actually start here at the beginning of round 2. Trae Young at 14 is a bit high for me, considering what we saw from him last season. I think that it's become pretty clear that with Atlanta's collection of players, it's just going to be tough for Trae to command the usage necessary to get to this spot on a per game basis. I like Kyrie Irving at number 16. I chose Jimmy Butler at 17, which we can talk a little bit more about in a little bit, because I'm very high on him in that spot, as I am with Nikola Vucevic at 18. That seems like a pretty safe bet. Bam Adebayo at 19 seems, all right. Sabonis at 20, Fred VanVleet at 21, Levine at 22, Zion at 23, and Julius Randle at 24. So let's pause here for a little bit. And in your opinion, Zach, do you feel that this was, is there any pick here that stands out to you as a big win or a big loss?
Yeah. For me, man, I think that Fred VanVleet pick at number 21, I think, I've seen some analysts rank him, that are doing early rankings. Mm-hmm. I've seen him come in as high as, 9th or 10th. I mean, the field goal percentage is something that you're going to be a little concerned about, but because I think he shot 38% last season, something like that. Yeah. But I mean, man, he contributes in nearly every other category. And with Kyle Lowry being out of there, I mean, you've got to, and Pascal Siakam being injured to start the season, you've got to expect that usage and just those, the counting stats and, the other, kind of peripherals to just kind of shoot up a little bit. So I think if you can get him at 21, I think that's a steal, man. I love that pick there. So yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I think I happen to agree that at that spot on a per game basis, it seems tough for Fred VanVleet to not hit value there for you. I think that he is one of the, when you look at him next to all these other names, I think just from like your general NBA fans perspective, he just looks out of place. And I think that
right.
I think he'll tend to fall a little farther in your just general drafts that aren't with, comprised of people who are plugged into this sort of thing. I do think that he's probably the best pick of that round. I do feel somewhat similar about, I'm not going to be tooting my own horn throughout this show, but I do really like Jimmy Butler at 17. And we could talk a little bit about him real quick, because I know that he is someone who a lot of people are expressing some concerns with now, Kyle Lowry moving into what was a spot occupied by him last year as the starting point guard. For all intents and purposes, Butler was Miami's starting point guard last year. He averaged career highs in assists, as you can see from the graphic here, almost over 3 more than his career averages. I mean, in your opinion, do you feel that those concerns justify Butler falling into the middle of the second round, or do you feel that he still has a shot at maybe getting into the top 12 of that first round value this year?
I think he definitely has a shot. I mean, like you said, the assist numbers, I think they're definitely going to fall. He's not going to be handling the ball quite as much, but I mean, he's always been a great rebounder. He's always been a great scorer. The steals are elite. Field goal percentage is decent, and he doesn't turn the ball over a whole lot. Even last season, 2 turnovers for a guy, like you said, was operating essentially as the team's de facto point guard. So, yeah, I think he definitely has a shot for all of those reasons. He helps you in so many categories. He really doesn't hurt you a ton. He doesn't have that 3-point game that might push him a little bit over the edge. So I think probably taking him in the middle of the second round, maybe even high second round, I think that's fair value for him right now. I'm hesitant on the first round value, but I think there's a shot.
Well, I definitely, I mean, he'll be one of the more highly contested names for that reason as we head forward here. But he's definitely someone who, if you find that you're in a draft room with people who are maybe a little more concerned over those assist numbers than others, if he falls with somewhere toward the end of the second round, I mean, that seems like no doubt he'll be a safe bet. But I agree, 17 at the moment is a very decent spot to grab him. And real quick, is there any name in that second round before we move on to the third that has now been recorded here that you feel that we've talked about LeBron being too high, Trey being a little too high at the spot? Is there any other name that strikes you as too high here, or do you feel that everyone else kind of went in a fair position?
I think Julius Randle is going to go very high just because of the, most improved player. And, he carried that team on his back last year. I mean, I think he led in scoring, rebounds, assists. The point guard position was a total mess for them last year. Mitchell Robinson was out. So, I think Randle had a little bit more responsibility rebounding, scoring. They didn't really get a whole lot from their scorers outside of him. They addressed that with Fournier, Kemba Walker, Derrick Rose is back. Robinson's supposed to be healthy. I don't think he approaches that top 24 value this season. I think that's a bit high.
I would agree with that actually as well. And I'm a little higher on Randle than I feel a lot of people are right now, but 24 just seems like it's too difficult for him to maintain that, given the high usage guys in Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier coming into the fold. He will take away both shots and playmaking opportunities. So he's definitely a name here that I would consider maybe waiting a little bit longer to see him fall. Let's take a look at the third round here. Well, I guess I'm about to be on the clock, so let me make a selection real quick. My team at the moment is comprised of Kevin Durant, Jimmy Butler, DeAndre Ayton, and McCall Bridges at this juncture here. And my draft strategy, I have to remember in the back of my mind somewhere what the plan was heading in here. I've been so many balls in the air. And you know what? I think that actually is a good segue into Lonzo being my selection here. I kind of like getting him at this juncture here and the sort of peripheral stats that he can provide. But let's, we can talk about him a little bit more coming up here. Let's take a look at the third round. These picks came in. We had LaMelo Ball going at 25, Russell Westbrook at 26, Donovan Mitchell 27, Rudy Gobert 28, Chris Paul, Chris Middleton, Michael Porter Jr., Ayton, SGA, Kawhi, which maybe the clock ran out on Carl there on that one, Miles Turner, and Rashawn Holmes. So Zach, I know that you are currently going through your next couple of picks here, so I'll lead us off with some impressions from this round of selections. We talked about how Westbrook was probably almost certainly going too high when he was ranked at 18. I'd still think that's the case if you choose him at 26. It just seems incredibly difficult for Westbrook to make good on that spot. I feel like this has to be the best case scenario from like in a 9-category league if Westbrook gets to this range on a basis of totals even. It just seems like it's a very tough bet. So I'm not a huge fan of that pick. I do like Rudy Gobert going at 28. I feel that he is generally slept on in a lot of fantasy drafts, and at that spot right there, you're getting one of the best shot blocking and rebounders in the NBA. Very good fit for particular builds, which we can dive into once we see sort of how everyone's drafts handed out at the end. But he might be my favorite selection here in this range. What about you? What do you think of these picks here, Zach?
So, let me see here. Sorry, man. Mine's lagging a little bit here.
It's all good.
It was rolling along fine for a little while, and now it's starting to lag again.
There was, well, why don't we talk about you went with Rashawn Holmes at 36, and then you went with Drew Holiday with the pick after at 37. Two picks I really like, actually, especially depending on what your build is. What are your impressions of those two seasons kind of coming up here, and do you feel that that's a good range for both if you're just looking at either in a fantasy draft?
Yeah, man, to be honest with you, I think that's pretty good value for both of them. I think both guys are capable of third-round value and maybe a little bit more. I know Holmes' first season when he went to Sacramento I think he was a first-round guy there for just a little while before he got injured. So he was putting up some big numbers. So that's a guy that I'm definitely going to target. We thought he might be going somewhere else in the offseason, but Sacramento obviously re-upped him. And we know Marvin Bagley has just been a complete disappointment. And then Drew Holiday, man, I mean, after that playoff run, I mean, we already know what he can do as far as defense, as far as scoring. He's a good rebounder for point guard. He gives you the assists, the steals. I mean, so those are just two guys that I really like all around. So I was happy to get both of them there at the turn.
And Holiday, he really took some leaps forward in terms of efficiency last year, which was pretty surprising. I mean, he shot in near 50% from the floor, or maybe even a little bit above that, which is, as far as point guard goes, that is about as high as it gets in the league. So that he's in a 9-category league, he's very, very safe, especially at 37. I feel that that's a fantastic pick. Frankly, one that maybe I wish I gave a little more thought before I went with Ayton at 32, which is not a bad selection, particularly with how he ended last year. Just that he did have, there was, of course, that first half of the season where he was probably outside the top 70 for the most part, just not able to find his role in that Chris Paul offense. But, after a finals run, perhaps he's settled in and maybe we just see him busting down the doors of top 25 value this year. I mean, he's still loaded with potential. And I mean, do you feel that Ayton has that kind of upside this year, or do you feel that at 32, you're kind of going with a guy at a safe spot who, you would be okay if he got above that, but wouldn't be expecting it?
Yeah, I think 32 is probably closer to his ceiling. I think if he can improve on the defensive numbers, I mean, if he can give you a little bit more, maybe in the blocks, I think he has that maybe second round potential. But I mean, yeah, the way he closed out last season, and correct me if I'm wrong, is this a contract year for him?
Well, yeah, he is rookie. He's eligible for his rookie contract extension. We've already seen guys like Luka Doncic, Trae Young, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander get theirs. And Ayton is kind of the big name on the board who has yet to get his of that crop that you would expect. He's probably max contract bound for Phoenix.
Yeah, so I definitely think, man, there's some upside there. So I have no problem with that pick at all. The pick that I'm most interested in is, I see you took Draymond Green at, what is this, 58?
Yes, I did. I noticed Draymond I actually wound up with Draymond at 65 in the 6th round.
Oh, there it is. Yep, 65. Okay.
Right there, yeah. Which I saw him at the top of the board, and I'm like, you know what? Easy. I feel that that's easy money at that spot, especially considering the fact that Golden State's going full bore for a championship run this year. We see that Draymond really thrives in a scenario where he's got all of his guys around him, getting to operate as the point forward Draymond. And this is honestly a range at 65. He exceeded this last year. So I can't really hate my prospects of him doing the same again this year in a context that's even better for him to produce.
No, not at all, man. I think that was a great value, and I really like your Lonzo Ball pick at 56, dude. I think I mean, man, he's easy top 5. I think that's a money selection or not top 5, top 50, I should say. That's
Hmm.
easy money. And he's got way more upside than even that. I think coming to Chicago, man, he's going to thrive. I mean, that was a great pick.
I appreciate that, and I'm really high. I've been trying to figure out the right range for Lonzo because everyone's kind of got their concerns about where he stands as a fourth option offensively in Chicago's lineup. But the key to Lonzo's game has never been in his scoring acumen, even though the threes that he's added to it over the years have been really positive. I think that he's got potential to average career numbers and assists potentially with this crop of guys around him. He might be able to get there with steals as well. I'm a big fan of 56, and again, I think that's a range that he exceeded last year on a per game basis as well back in New Orleans. Let's take a tiny step back here to round 4 with all these picks in the book. First thing that jumps out to me when I look at this crop of players is Kristaps Porzingis going at 39, which on a per game basis is a pretty decent bet he'll exceed that. We saw Porzingis play mostly healthy last year and turn out to be a borderline top 25 player on a per game basis. This is a 9-category head-to-head league mock draft, so you have to factor in the potential for injury as a concern. But even so, if Porzingis manages to avoid any serious injuries this year, 39 seems like a safe bet for him to return value. So I'm a big fan of that selection there. And I also really like Clint Capella at 48, who just seems like a lock to exceed that valuation, given what we saw out of him last year, or at the very least hit that one. And especially if you're in a build that's suited to the holes in his fantasy game, he's a solid selection there. What are you thinking, Zach, in terms of these 4th round picks here? Who stands out as a big win, and who do you think went a little too high?
Big win, man. Immediately, Jaylen Brown stands out to me at 46. I mean, to me, he seems like he's got, second round upside. He's just continuing to get better. Obviously, Boston, moved away from Kemba and Yvonne Fournier in the offseason. So, I mean, Jaylen Brown is not – I don't think he's that far off the mark of Jason Tatum in terms of, maybe talent and upside as, maybe some of these drafts would have you believe. I think he's a really excellent player. So I think 46 is a great value for him.
On the flip side of that, oh, sorry, go. You didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, you're good. Go ahead, man.
Well, I was curious. So you would compare Jaylen Brown, put Jaylen Brown on a comparable level. There's the words to Jason Tatum. Where does that leave you for taking Jason Tatum in the first round? Is there a range that you feel is too high for him this year? Because I know that there's some people, who would say that Tatum could go even higher than the sort of 10 range that we've seen him in the last couple of years.
Yeah, so it's not an indictment on Tatum as much as it's just an endorsement of Jaylen Brown, because I think Brown is, like I said, a second round guy. He's not on the same level as Tatum, but it's not as far off as maybe 3 rounds in fantasy. Tatum to me is a first round guy, absolutely, no disputing that. But I think Brown has top 24 upside just if he continues to develop on the track that he's going right now.
Well, that Boston's definitely banking on it. The team is completely suited to both him and Tatum. And if a top 24 season out of Brown would suggest pretty big things for Boston this year, one would assume. So that's a very interesting selection there. I like him at 46. I'm not quite as high, but I can definitely see the upside, particularly if we start seeing a little more. Maybe Brown getting a little more involved as a playmaker, because Boston's kind of got a setup this year where they don't really have a true point guard on the roster. Marcus Smart is figuring to start there, but I can imagine that this Boston team really kind of does playmaking by committee in a lot of ways this year. And if Brown ends up on the receiving end of that, I mean, that could be an interesting source of value that he might not have tapped into previously. Before we move on to the 5th round here, I will, taking a look at some of these picks here, I do like the Jaren Jackson Jr. selection at 42. If he stays healthy this year, that's a strong bet to exceed that on a per-game basis, particularly if Memphis decides to pivot to playing him more at center now that Jonas Valanciunas is out of town. They got Steven Adams in here, but, I mean, if Memphis determines that Jaren Jackson makes more sense at center, I don't think it's outside the realm of possibilities that you put him there and bring Adams off the bench at a certain point. I mean, it remains to be seen. But I don't really see Adams as a guy who will define how they move forward with developing some of these young guys like Jackson and Ja. And then if I were to pick one guy here that's pretty interesting to me, because there's a lot of questions about his fit, speaking of the Grizzlies and Steven Adams, Jonas Valanciunas in New Orleans. He is going here at 47, which if he were still in Memphis would be a terrific selection. But I got to say that there's still a few questions, at least that I have, about what JV can do in this new setup here in New Orleans. He's going to be the starting center alongside Zion Williamson. Take a look at these numbers from him from last year. He was an excellent player. He was a top 40 player for the majority of the year, and that's even more so on totals. But it's noteworthy that a lot of his value came from his ability to rebound. Now, and really just being the main guy in the middle for Memphis. I think that there's some spacing concerns with Jonas Valanciunas and Zion. I do think he's a better fit than Adams was, but don't buy into this notion that JV is a floor spacer just because he has a decent 3-point percentage. That's a very low volume figure. He is not a 3-point shooter. He and Zion are going to have to figure out how to play next to each other. And as you'll note here on the bottom here, Memphis didn't really have people crashing the glass at the level around JV at the level that New Orleans is going to have with Zion as a front court partner. Nobody in Memphis averaged more than 6 boards a game, which in part allows Valanciunas to average 12 last year, career number. So, Zach, how do you view JV in this new setup? Do you think that he is still a top 40 player, or do you share my concerns with his fit in New Orleans next to Zion?
I do share your concerns for all the reasons that you mentioned. And I'm going to go ahead. I'm on the clock real quick. I'm going to go ahead and, man, I'm drafting at 108 right here. This is my last pick in the ninth. Yeah, this is my last pick in the 9th round. And shoot, man, Andrew Wiggins is staring right at me. So that's for me, that's an easy top 90 value this year.
I agree.
And he was one of the stats I really think is the most interesting with Wiggins is one of 3 guard eligible players last year to average at least 1 block per game. So, I mean, you're getting a lot of value from him, and just the efficiency last year kind of took off for him. So I need some help at center, and I'm grabbing Derek Favors here.
Very interesting. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, man, I think there's, we saw obviously Oklahoma City is rebuilding, but, we saw them give Al Horford, I think he was top 80 value the last healthy season that he played. So Favors could have a similar role, and just based on his efficiency and some of the numbers he can provide, even when he was a backup, he was giving you decent numbers for your fantasy team, just kind of a, unheralded guy that you don't really talk about.
No, absolutely. And I think a lot of people will forget about his, just about him in general after that stint as a backup there. I'll be very interested to see how Oklahoma City decides to handle both his minutes and just games played this year if they're not able to find a suitable trade partner, because we already know the book on that one. We've seen them rest better players for longer stretches than we would have imagined than Favors. But he comes out the gate swinging as that starting center, maybe boosts up his value some. Maybe he gets traded to a situation where he can still maintain a role in like the mid-20s or something like that. So I think there's a lot. I mean, look, in the 100 range, we're just taking dart throws at the guys that we feel have the best chance to convert, and I have no problem with Favors there, especially in the early going. He could pan out. But so on JV, before we move on to the 5th round here, so do you feel that top 40 is a little too optimistic for him, or do you think that there's still a chance that he can hit that with his just all-around efficiency from the field and the line, and a chance to maybe still hit double-digit rebounds?
I think he's more of a top 60-ish kind of guy. I mean, if you want to grab him maybe at the end of the 5th round, or maybe beginning of the 6th round, if he's going to be there. I think he's one of those. It's all about cost versus ceiling. So, I mean, what is his potential range of outcomes? I think all the concerns that you mentioned, especially playing alongside Zion. I think he's maybe a guy that I probably will shy away from this year in drafts, just because the cost is going to be a little bit too high based on, what's the ceiling you're going to be getting out of him.
I'm in agreement there. Unless he starts slipping to that 50s, early 60s range, like you referenced, I think that he's going to be a guy that I'm going to have a tough time relying on. So interesting selection. A lot of questions about that fit in New Orleans. Let's take a look at the 5th round here. Interesting selections, particularly one that jumps out to me is Ben Simmons at 49, but that's a can of worms that I don't think you and I are equipped to address at the moment on this podcast or this video, whatever we are, because this is just not. I mean, it could be Ben Simmons could be anywhere from a top 30 player in a best case scenario. He goes to a team that he has control of all the keys, or he's like a top 90 guy and he's just one of 4 players with, who even knows? It's impossible to judge. 49 is probably not the spot I'd take a risk on him, though, until he gets traded, in my opinion. That's going to be tough. Yeah.
Yeah, dude. If he falls to maybe pick 100 or something, which I don't think he will, but
No.
I mean, otherwise, man, he's not going to be on my team this year. There's too many question marks.
Unless that trade comes soon, yeah. If you're drafting your teams now, I just can't, in good conscience, recommend Ben Simmons at any juncture unless you're at the dart throw period of the top 100, like outside that top 100 range, because it could just, you could get screwed on that one very feasibly. Moran at 50 feels a little high to me just because we haven't seen him get close to this. I mean, we all know he has potential, but in terms of just fantasy, potential in real life, he's already basically a star player. But in terms of fantasy, we have not seen him get close to this range. And if you're projecting that this is the year that he does, you kind of lose out any hope at finding value from him at 50. That feels like maybe even a little higher than a best case scenario with all the statistical holes in his game. I also am, I'm a little curious. OG Anunoby, I'm just noticing him at 59 here. I think that's a great selection, given the usage bump that he's going to see this year. I think that they want to roll him out in a lot of different ways as a perhaps, maybe even someone who threatens Pascal Siakam's touches on offense. I mean, I don't know if we're getting to that degree with him, but I think that there's a lot of interest internally about Anunoby's potential to just take the next step with this team. Who stands out to you in this range, Zach? Is there anyone that went too high or too low for you?
I'm just going to piggyback off of you, man. Anunoby to me is a guy that's top 40 value. That just seems like a lock to me.
Yeah.
It's just like you mentioned, he's a guy that's going to start taking off in value. We saw it from him last year, just a career marks across the board for him. And he contributes in so many ways. And with Siakam being out, I think he's really going to be leaned on, especially with, your other starting forward is probably going to be Scotty Barnes, right? I mean, so you're going to lean on the veteran. And I just am expecting some huge numbers from him. Getting him at 59 seems like that's a steal.
Yeah, I would totally agree. Interestingly here, we're seeing one of the more hyped names in fantasy hoops going in this round, Robert Williams, getting him at 55 right there, which I actually think is a pretty solid range for him, given what we've already seen from Robert Williams so far. I mean, last year in a barely over 20 minutes a game role, he basically hit that mark with high block numbers, high steal numbers, and insane field goal percentage. The questions around him this year, obviously, are what kind of role can we expect in Ime Udoka's rotations? Al Horford's in town and figures to be the starter at center. Can those two play together? Can Robert Williams get past his own injury concerns and his own injury history to play more than 24 minutes a night? There's so many questions. And Zach, it is now, I'm going to kick it to you. Can you answer those for us?
I don't think so, man. I don't know. I don't know if he's going to be able to stay healthy. But I think if he does, we saw it last year. He was a fantasy darling last year. He was, he was kind of in that same vein as like a Moses Brown, just somebody that you picked up off the waiver wire. And his value just went through the roof. I think the biggest concerns, like you said, are going to be health. And honestly, man, the Al Horford signing, I think, does kind of cap his value a little bit. People might think he's washed or, might not be able to do much, but he's a very savvy veteran. He's very smart, high IQ, and somebody that is going to push him for minutes. Because that was another issue with him last year, was just consistent playing time. Just because they kept rotating so many guys in and out of that center position. I mean, if he's going to see 25 to 30 minutes a night, I mean, that's top 30 upside for me.
Oh yeah.
But there's just so many question marks. So if you want to get him, in the range that we saw here from this draft, that's wonderful, man. That's totally fine. But yeah, I probably won't be spending a third round pick on him or anything like that. Too many
Oh yeah.
question marks.
Yeah, I think at that point you are kind of capping. You're working against yourself at that point. Like, I think that this is a fair range to get him, particularly on name value. If you're just in a regular NBA, like just fantasy league draft, Robert Williams is not going to be a guy who should have the name recognition to bump him up that high. But at 55 right there, that's the sweet spot, in my opinion. I really think that there's a good chance that he could at least hit that range. I'd love to see if he could fall any lower. My guess, though, is that the hype is probably going to bump him up a little higher than that the farther down the road we get on this stuff. Let's talk about your pick here. You went with Derek White here at number 60 and then Marcus Smart at 61. Now, I know that you're interested by the San Antonio Spurs guards this season, right? Correct me if I'm wrong there, but you definitely you're high on both White and DeJounte Murray, or is there one over the other that you're particularly interested in?
Man, I think that's going to be something that people are going to be arguing about all through the off season. Because I think both have a shot to, be top 40 or 50 guy. Maybe not top 40, but both have a shot to be top 50 guys at least. Maybe Murray has a little bit more upside. But again, White is another guy that he was in the bubble. He just erupted when we saw him there. He's a guy that is, he can just contribute in so many ways. And he's kind of like Wiggins that I mentioned. He was another one of those guards that averaged a block per game from his position. He can shoot the three. He's not going to turn the ball over a lot. Good on defense. So I think for all those reasons, man, I kind of had to take him right there. Murray was off the board already, but he's got top 50 upside. Getting him, where I got him, I think was, a great pick. I think I reached a little bit for Marcus Smart. Looking back on it, I think that was a little bit of a reach, but if he's going to be the starting point guard, I know Schroeder's going to be there, but Marcus Smart, I think he had a career high, in assists last season, and he's great with the ball in his hands. He's great finding teammates. He gives you the solid defense. So maybe a little bit of a reach, but I think he can return that value.
I'm also pretty high on both. I do think, at 6, just going back to White real quick, he does have one of the more interesting fantasy stat sets of, pretty much a lot of guards in the NBA. And I'm very, in particular, on that graphic that we just had up there's a lot of usage left behind by DeMar DeRozan that you figure is going to be split between those two. Probably Keldon Johnson's that third guy that offensively gets a lot more attention this season. But top 60, if White can stay healthy, I do think that he can exceed that position on a per game basis. We saw stretches of that last year whenever he was in between the injuries and the COVID diagnosis. And Murray, it's interesting that of those two, Derek White's the guy who's the shot blocker, because DeJounte Murray, one of the big things that people were excited about with him, in years past, is like, this guy's got length out the gym. Like, he can block shots like crazy, right? And he averaged 0.1 last year. Like, it's just not, that element's not in his game, but I still can't feel like I can separate the fact that he's got the tools to get there at some point, right?
Absolutely, man. He's using that length and that size for rebounds. He's an excellent rebounder. But yeah, you're exactly right. We just haven't seen the blocks, become part of his game yet.
And perhaps it'll be the case this year, and it'll be fascinating to see how that usage from DeRozan gets split up. But I do think that if you want to take a bet on those two guards exceeding top 60 value on a per game basis, I think it'd be a wise one. I feel that we're both in agreement on that. So the draft is basically ending in real time. We are still catching up here, learning some fascinating things about this process. This is kind of my first Yahoo mock of the season. They have really sped things up, which is great. It help you get in and out. So we'll sort of pick up the pace on our end here as we go through these other picks. Still touch on some of the big ones here. We have in the round 6 range here. Like we started off, you started us off with Marcus Smart. Nurkic at 62, I think, is a pretty decent value considering that he stays healthy this year. Jamal Murray is not going to play until like the last week of the season or so. I really like Anthony Edwards at 64. If you can wind up getting him in drafts at that range, I'm a proponent of the potential that he has this year. And I think at 60, you have a shot at perhaps getting value from him there. But he's going to be a pretty buzzy name. They'll be curious to see where in other drafts down the road he ends up going. But I like that pick at that spot. We talked about Draymond at 65, which I thought was, I think is a pretty safe bet to exceed value. And then, kind of down the board here, we got some other interesting selections of DeMar at 68 by David Williams of the HoopBall Grizzlies podcast. I think that's a fair spot for him, as is CJ McCollum right ahead of him at 67. I like all these picks aside from D'Angelo Russell at 69. What do you feel about – let's talk about Minnesota real quick. I mean, how do you feel about D'Lo playing in a healthy backcourt with Anthony Edwards this year? Do you feel that those two have top 70 upside or one or the other? Or, I mean, what's your read on that?
I think Edwards is going to be the guy that has, the biggest upside out of either of those guys. Mm-hmm. Russell staying healthy has been kind of an issue for him recently. But I mean, he's still a guy that can give you, 20 and 7 when he's healthy and when he's really on his game. Yeah. But yeah, I think Edwards definitely kind of caps that upside. I think Edwards is going to end up as the better scorer. I don't know if he's quite there yet on that level, but I mean, from what he showed last year, he's almost there. So I think Edwards has the most, probably the most upside, but for where he might be going in drafts, I think Russell is probably going to end up being the better value of the two. And honestly, if we're talking like extreme value, at the very end, my very final pick in this draft, I took Malik Beasley. Which I think people are probably forgetting about him after, the way he ended last season and he just got out of prison. But I mean, if he's going to be a starter on this team, I mean, if I want to get him with the last pick in my draft, that's better value than both of those guys, in my opinion. I mean, what do you think about this team?
I mean, there's a lot. When Chris Finch took over, the fantasy value for everyone kind of went up. He's an offensive-minded guy, and if anyone's capable of the new coaches in these new systems of getting the most out of these offensive-oriented players, it's him. So I have a lot of faith that we can see some pretty valuable guys out of Minnesota this year. Karl Anthony Towns, obviously being the first-round guy that some people might even say has top 5 overall potential in this year's draft. I'm a little lower on Beasley just because I think that of all those 4 guys, he's the one whose shots are probably going to go down the most. But I have no problem you taking him at the 150s range. There's no risk at that point. And he has shown us that with the appropriate amount of volume, he can get you to a top 100 mark in 9 category leagues. So let's take a look here. Moving on to round 7. Bunch of interesting names went off the board in this range. And this is also sort of the point of the draft where it got too quick for me to keep up.
Yep.
I wound up with Mike Conley, which I don't hate at that spot. He's kind of boring. Forget about team build. That went out the window a while ago. But, seems to be at the 80s. I mean, as long as he's healthy and playing, it feels tough for me to envision him falling far below that mark. But the 2 guys I really like here, I love your pick, by the way. Bogdan Bogdanovic, my guy, going at 84. He's a fascinating player, given what we saw from him at the end of last season. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about what you see in him coming up here for year 2 in Atlanta, hopefully healthy the entire time. Do you think that you have got yourself a draft day steal with him at that spot?
Oh, I think this was a total steal on my part. And I actually got sniped. I was looking at taking Stewart and Bogdanovic, back to back, and I got sniped on that Stewart pick. But yeah, dude, Bogdanovic, I mean, he closed out the season just on absolute fire. He only played 44 games last year, but I mean, he averaged, 16, 3 and 3, and 3.3 triples per game. Shooting percentages are great. He's giving you over a steal a game. It's a guy that he's kind of like the Trae Young's Robin, I guess you could say. I mean, it's Batman and Robin, and he's an excellent number 2 option for that team that really showed after he got out of Sacramento just how important and valuable he could be for a team. And we especially saw that when he was filling in when Trae was out for, for those games at the end of the season and then, of course, in the playoffs. So I think if he can kind of build on that momentum heading into this season, man, I think he's got top 60 upside for sure. So, yeah, I love that he was still available to me this late.
Yeah, and as you can see from these numbers, that when he returned from his knee injury back in March, this was a guy who was rolling at a top 30 pace by totals and top 40 by on a per game number. And obviously, when you take a look at some of the shooting splits that he had during that time, there's going to be some regression, particularly with the 3-point shot. Like as you can see from that figure there, 46% on threes at a high volume like he was taking them is not sustainable. Right. But it's evidence of Atlanta's kind of offensive balance and just how difficult it is to guard this team when they are healthy. And even, they didn't have DeAndre Hunter during this stretch either, who's going to cut into some of those touches on offense. But Bogey is just, I think he's going in the 80s where you got him here. There's no doubt in my mind that if he's healthy, he's going to exceed that mark with just a very balanced attack. Not going to be as high as efficiency as we saw from him during this stretch, but I think a plus value in that area as well. Probably one of my favorite picks on the board, and that's not my Hawks fan bias talking. I think that he is. I think that he's a safe bet for value there. And you mentioned Isaiah Stewart too, who went right ahead of you at that spot. He's another interesting name, particularly because I think that he is among, he and Robert Williams to me are these two hype centers coming out of last year into this year's draft. Take a look at the numbers I have up here on the screen. Isaiah Stewart. These are disjointed games, but when you take a look at his splits as a starter, those are some pretty appealing numbers. 12 points, 9 boards, 2 blocks per game on really high field goal percentage. That's the kind of stuff that puts him in that top 40 range if he were to sustain that as the full-time starter in Detroit this year. Now, Kelly Olynyk's there. I don't think that we're going to see Stewart playing 29 minutes a game like he had in this stat line that we're seeing on the screen. But what are your thoughts? I mean, do you feel that Stewart does have that top 40 upside this year? Do you think that he can exceed 24 minutes a night in that starting lineup with Olynyk? I mean, where do you have him on your board?
Yeah, that's a tough one, man. I have him currently ranked number 60 overall right now, which is, I mean, I'm really bullish on Stewart this year.
Yeah.
I mean, just because his per 36 numbers were 13 and 11 with over 2 blocks a game. I think Kelly Olynyk definitely, I mean, shoot, he complicates things because Olynyk was, I mean, he was a first round guy for, the end of the season, the fantasy. He probably won you a fantasy championship last year if he was on your roster.
Yeah.
I think that's why Detroit brought him in to kind of add some veteran presence. But, we've only seen Kelly Olynyk really come into those starting minutes and have that high usage out of desperation. I mean, he was on Houston last year and they were completely tanking. Nobody was healthy. I think Isaiah Stewart, after, he was an all NBA rookie last year, very impressive. This team is very forward thinking right now with Cade and with him, Sadiq Bey, Jeremy Grant. I don't think Kelly Olynyk necessarily fits the mold of what they're trying to do for the future. So I think this is going to be Stewart's show this year. And I still am very, very bullish on him exceeding that value.
And just which of these two would you prefer to wind up with in a fantasy draft? Like we're talking, Williams is likely going ahead of Stewart in most cases. One could argue that he has a higher fantasy ceiling between the two, but if you're just trying to go for value here and you can only wind up with one, who are you going with?
I think based on value, I have Williams ranked about 20 spots ahead of him, right outside the top 40. But as far as value goes, if you can get Stewart in the 80s and Robert Williams is going for, where did he end up in this draft? In the 40s, right?
55, actually.
55. Okay. So in that 55 range, I mean, you could get a guy that may be comparable in Isaiah Stewart, and again, you were just showing that here. They're kind of close. Shoot, if I could get somebody in that 55 range, like Alonzo Ball, maybe, and then pick Isaiah Stewart 20 picks later, yeah, why wouldn't I do that? I mean, if I'm going to get somebody of comparable value in the 80s compared to the 40s or 50s, yeah, I think that's better value.
Well, there's going to be an interesting debate to keep a monitor on as these ranks develop as we get closer to draft season. But two centers who I think are going to be incredibly exciting. I hope to wind up with either as we move forward here. So our draft window's closed. The Yahoo has decided that this year we do not want people messing around and we want to get in and out. But here are the results as we continue to pour through here the data here. We're going to zoom through these last bits here. But we saw you go in round 8, Devontae Graham right off the bat. That's probably around pick 88 there. Andre Drummond went off the board a little after that. He's currently ranked a little too high by Yahoo, and I cannot imagine that that's anywhere close to where he's going. I think you can't really draft him at all this year, frankly. I just don't think that's even an option, really. Kimba going after him there is a pretty decent spot. As I also really like Jakob Poeltl. I wound up with Robert Covington, who I think is a pretty safe bet at around pick 90 to turn value in for you there. Jonathan Isaac's a really interesting name too. There's a bunch of guys here, in fact, in this draft range who are kind of either in new situations or coming back from injury. So pick a name from this list of round 8. Is there anyone who jumps out to you as a solid steal value-wise?
As a solid steal value-wise, you know what? I don't know, man. I think all of these guys are pretty. I think they're right there where they should be, to be honest with you. I think. Ugh. Yeah, I think they're right where they should be. I mean, I think the only name that really just absolutely terrifies me there is Andre Drummond at. Yeah, I mean, like you said, dude, he's a guy maybe you take a late round flyer on if you're in a deeper league, just in hopes that Embiid misses some time, maybe. But
that's it.
That's it. How else are you taking them? So that one terrifies me. The rest of them, slow mo there at the end, and John Wall, I think is that the health definitely scares me there too. On a per game basis, I think that's fine. So I think the rest of them they're appropriate.
I do too. Jonathan Isaac's the one name that jumps out to me as the biggest boom or bust at that spot. But when you're talking about getting a guy with his upside in the 90s, where if he's healthy, I mean, he has the stat set to be a third round value kind of guy, and that might be even a little conservative given what we've seen in the past. It's a very interesting pick there, and he's very far down Yahoo's boards right now. I don't even think that he's ranked inside the top 150 yet. So he's the type of guy that you're going to have in mind if you're going into drafts. He can be forgotten about pretty easily at this juncture. So now we're kind of getting to the top 100 picks range, and we can just speed through these and just kind of point out some guys that we like after that. Because my rule of thumb in a fantasy draft, once you get past your top 100, it's just you trying to go for the highest upside pick here. There's no real reaches at this range. So let's talk a little bit. Going round 9 and up, you round up with Derek Favors and Andrew Wiggins at that spot like we discussed. And I think that Wiggins in particular is a fantastic spot, a surefire bet to give you value at that juncture. I wound up with Jalen Green, which is funny. I mean, I don't think that it's going to happen in pretty much any of my drafts this year. If the rookies to go for, he is not the name that I've got penciled in. I'd prefer a Cade Cunningham, a Jalen Suggs, and maybe an Evan Mobley. I still don't really know how I feel about Cleveland's front court situation, but Jalen Green, to me, based off of the numbers we saw out of college, I'd have some pretty strong concerns about his efficiency, just in the turnovers and just really just taking some shots at those spots with the key, basically him running the show in Houston. But elsewhere, I think that as far as picks that I really like from what I'm looking at right in front of me here, I'm interested in Nickeil Alexander-Walker as the presuming starting shooting guard in New Orleans. I think that's solid. And I do like Thaddeus Young too, towards the end of round 10. I mean, there's questions about where he's going to play all year, but for the moment it looks like he's going to be in San Antonio and could be in their starting lineup. And I think that's a safe bet for value there. What about you? Who from this range do you feel is someone that you would like to target after the top 100 picks?
Yeah, I love Thaddeus Young. Thagic Johnson. We love these, and we've seen it with Jokic. We've seen it with guys like Mason Plumlee. We've seen it. These passing bigs. They're really, really excellent for your fantasy team. And Thaddeus Young is a guy that is definitely going to be doing that. He had that stretch last year where he was just teasing triple doubles,
Mm,
night after night. So whether he's in San Antonio or, shipped off elsewhere, I think that's a guy that I'm totally fine with there. I think Daniel Gafford is somebody that uh, he's a guy that I love, and I loved him when he went to Washington. I think he's got more opportunity now because Alex Lynn, Robin Lopez are gone.
mm,
It's just going to be Thomas Bryant, but I don't know what was going on with him last year. He averaged like no minutes a night and was just ultra efficient when he was on the court, but they just wouldn't give him that time. So
mm.
that's a guy that I think is a super high upside pick, but just very, very risky. Um, and shoot, Keldon Johnson right there in round 10, man, that's another one that really sticks
Yeah,
out.
I didn't even notice him there. That's a good pick.
That's an awesome value right there that late. So yeah, those are the ones I like. McConnell's interesting after the steals and all the assists that he put up last year. It's another unheralded guy, but
Yeah,
yeah, round 10, that was a pretty interesting round actually. Steven
yeah,
Adams, I hate right there, but
yeah. That's a tough one. I mean, unless you're assuming that Adams just kind of absorbs the Jonas Valanciunas rebounding opportunities, which I'm not sure if I'm a proponent of that idea. I agree. I wouldn't touch Adams unless. I mean, I'd probably take him before Andre Drummond, I guess. But I don't. As far as there are far better options to go for hunting value in this range. Taking a look at these last 3 rounds here, right off the bat, Nerlens Noel is a center that I like more than Steven Adams. Even if you assume Mitchell Robinson starts the whole season, we already know what the deal is with Noel. You give him 18 to 20 minutes a night, and he could probably get you close to the top 100. People are still going to sleep on him because he's not all that exciting, but percentages, steals, blocks, he is one of the best in the league at getting you all of those. So that's a really solid selection at that spot. I wound up with Sadiq Bey in this range, and I think at 128, I could do a lot worse. He's going to start all season, and when you look at his starting splits from last year, he exceeds this rank. So assuming that he takes the next jump, seems like a safe bet for value, especially if you need threes and steals. You in this range went with Bobby Portis and Larry Nance Jr. I actually like both of those guys, and Bob. No one really talks about. Were these picks that you made, or did these kind of like get when we and I were talking? Did they kind of scroll through a little too quick for you?
they were picks that I made.
Yeah.
The one that I was just kicking myself for afterward was I took Nance before Reggie Jackson, which
Mm.
I should have gone for Reggie Jackson, man. I think he's just going to be a usage monster this year
Yeah, he could be
with Kawhi
very
Leonard
easily.
being out. But I like Larry Nance. He was leading the NBA in steals for a period last year. I think he can give you a lot of the same things that Robert Covington can give you. The 3-and-D kind of play,
Yeah.
and Portland is desperate for any sort of depth in that front court. So totally fine with Larry Nance there. And Bobby P, man, he was way exceeded this value last year. So
Yeah.
I was fine taking him there as well.
And I'd argue with Portis too. I mean, when you consider the fact that, like, I'm not out on Brook Lopez this season. I think that if you can get him in the 100s range, he's a solid enough option for block shots and some decent percentages. But he's up there as far as Milwaukee Bucks are concerned. He's of the older guys. He plays a position that's physically demanding, and they're coming off a finals run.
Mm-hmm.
They have Bobby Portis backing him up, who is a more than capable center. He's young. He can stretch the floor like he can. I mean, you can make the argument that Portis sees more minutes this season than he did last year to give Lopez some rest as they kind of gear up for the playoff run. And I think that there's some sneaky top 100 upside with him if that's the case. So I think he's a name that people don't really want to talk about, but I really like that selection there. That was someone that I was going to target myself if he was available at the final pick. A name that I'm kicking myself that I didn't notice at that point is a fan favorite here at HoopBall and across fantasy, the fantasy landscape in general. In round 13, I'm seeing DeAnthony Melton going there to M1. But keep an eye on Memphis, man. They cleared out some space for Melton this year. Grayson Allen's out of town. they continue to tweak their roster, but it seems like Melton has the pathway to getting close to 20 minutes a night. And the word's been out on Melton for the last 2 years. For those of you plugged in, you get him to 20 minutes and he is an easy top 100 player. He could be a top 60 player in that amount of time. And I'm not saying that we should expect him to be a top 60 player on the season or something like that, but at that spot, man, that is easy money. So he might be my favorite pick of the entire post 100 picks, noticing him right there. What about you, Zach? Who else here do you feel is just being a little slept on with how far they've fallen at this juncture?
Yeah, man. Again, I'll do another piggyback here with DeAnthony Melton. Yeah, the question is just going to be the minutes, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Memphis is one of those teams that is just very deep at multiple positions, and especially in that backcourt. You mentioned Grayson Allen is gone, but again, they added, Zaire Williams. In the draft, they still have John Morant, they still have Dylan Brooks, and it seems like Brooks is going to be that guy that's going to be just locked in for 30 plus minutes a night. But like you mentioned, man, Melton is just absolutely per 36 minutes, 16, 5, and 4 last year, 3.2 combined blocks and steals, and 3 triples. I mean, that's ridiculous production. So yeah, I mean, if you want to take a chance on him later in drafts, I mean, he's going to be there. Why wouldn't you? All it's going to take is maybe 1 or 2 injuries, or just the coaching staff making some time for him. And I think, yeah, value shoots way up. So I love that pick there as well. Total agreement.
As far as other dart throws here, I'm noticing David wound up with Aleksej Pokusevski at the end of this draft. Still plenty of question marks about his ability to physically play in the NBA. Yeah. But the talent's there. Not a bad dart throw by any stretch. I'm noticing here, too, that Icefandiar, I think that's what that says. He wound up with Tyrese Maxey right before I wound up with Dorian Finney-Smith, who's fine. That's not. That was an auto draft pick. He'll probably get you value there, but he's not that exciting. Maxey, on the other hand, I assume was made in the anticipation of a Ben Simmons trade. That perhaps that would clear the way for Maxey to start at point guard. I think that's an interesting perspective to take as a dart throw at the very end of your draft. These guys aren't going to be locks for your roster long term. But if I were to choose a guy in Philly who I'd like to take final pick, I'm looking at Matisse Thybulle, because I think that if Simmons is out of town and Thybulle's left over, that clears the way for him to be their starting small forward. I feel that the spacing concerns with those two have made it difficult in the past to weigh that. But if Thybulle is out and you have a point guard who can space the floor in that starting lineup, I mean, man, that's a guy who can crush it for you in defensive stats. What's your take there? Do you feel, are you interested in either Maxey or Thybulle as a final pick?
Yeah, I think I'm more interested in Thybulle for the reasons you mentioned, and also because this is something that me and the commissioner of my dynasty league have kind of discussed a little bit with Tyrese Maxey. Is he's on my dynasty roster, and a guy that I was really excited about, this season. Hey, Ben Simmons is going to be out of town. He's going to be the starter. He's excellent. He was good in summer league, on and on and on. And, come to find out recently that Rich Paul, his agent, said, hey, because he reps Ben Simmons too. He said, hey, any sort of trade with Ben Simmons, I'm going to really push to get Tyrese Maxey included. So it seems like maybe their stars are going to be tied together a little bit. And so that kind of scares me off Maxey a little bit, if he's traded with Simmons, because obviously he'll play behind him wherever they end up. So that's something that kind of makes me a little leery, even though I love the talent. But yeah, man, Thybulle for me, he's a guy that is going to get you those coveted defensive numbers. And I think he can continue to grow, in other facets of his game. So that's the guy that I prefer.
It'll be, again, I'm not really a proponent of making picks based off of transactions that have yet to happen. But if you're talking about your last pick in the draft, there's no issue with that, particularly with someone with like Thybulle, who has this immense upside and there's a logical connection to make that if he sticks behind in the wake of a Simmons trade, that there's more avenues for him to get on the floor. I think that he's potentially very exciting pick at those final spots. But yeah, man, that is our draft here. Now, what was your? Did you have a strategy going in that you were able to maintain throughout? I can talk about mine, but it did go out the window the farther we went into this sort of thing here. Do you feel satisfied with how your draft went?
Yeah, I think it went all right. I think I should have maybe anticipated a little bit more. How quickly the picks were going to go.
Mm-hmm.
My strategy at first was just going to be punting blocks, just because I thought at the turn there, hey, I'm going to get PG and potentially another elite guard. But then I ended up getting Anthony Davis while we were talking, just because I ran out of time, and that's who we went with. So
Tough to punt blocks then.
yeah, right. I'm happy with how everything turned out, man.
Yeah.
I think I got some great value there. Um, and I think definitely this was a nice exercise to show just how crazy these Yahoo ranks are. We talked about it at the beginning, and we just saw it all over this draft. There was value in every single round.
Yeah, I totally agree. My strategy, I was hoping to wind up with one of Durant, Tatum, or Karl Anthony Towns, and just sort of from that point forward, kind of build out another, maybe lean into punt blocks. Similarly, I wound up with Durant, who, from a per game basis is as well rounded as anyone. So I just kind of tried to, I just decided to forego any sort of punt builds as we went down the board there. And, with Butler and Ayton and McCall Bridges, I think that I did a decent job of achieving that. But like you said, man, this is a stage right now where the ranks have yet to catch up to public consensus. Fantasy analyst input in moving guys up and down the boards. Kawhi Leonard and Klay Thompson showing up in the top 70, which you shouldn't go anywhere near, obviously. Like, there's still a lot of stuff that you got to shake out. But yeah, this was really cool. This was really exciting, and I'm really happy to have talked to you going through all these different ranks and just all these interesting value plays and hearing your perspectives, Zach. So again, thanks for hopping on the show. Let people know where they can find some of your work and what you've got cooking up coming down for in the NBA season, or even if you're doing some NFL stuff, which I know that you dabble in as well.
Yeah, man. Again, thanks for having me, man. This was a lot of fun. I love what you guys are doing at HoopBall, and this was a blast doing this draft with you today. You can find me on Twitter at Zach the Monster. I do work for FantasyPros for this NFL season. This will be the second year in a row that I will be doing quick grades article for them every Friday. It's over 200 players that I grade out based on how I think they're going to fare for that week. I also do player notes and rankings for them as well. On the basketball side of things, I'll be doing basketball content for them this year again. I just dropped the top 150 with notes, 9-cat rankings over there. So, definitely head over to Fantasy Pros and check that out as well.
Absolutely. I'll be on the lookout for that stuff too. I've got an NFL draft coming up in the next week or so. So I'll definitely take a look at your rankings as well, man. If there is they're as good as your basketball analysis, then I think I'll be pretty well off. I appreciated having you on again. I hope we can do something else like this coming up sometime soon too. And, just take it easy.
Appreciate it, man. Yeah, I'd love to come back on anytime, dude. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. And if y'all appreciated what you saw here today, please drop a like on the video and subscribe. This is the first of many mock drafts that we're going to be doing on the channel. Might tweak the format to make it keep it up with the pace going forward with these Yahoo mocks, maybe even experiment with some fan tracks and ESPN sites as well. And keep an eye out. We've got a lot of other off-season centric content coming out your way. So it's going to be pretty great. And we will hope to bring y'all in for that as well. Take it easy, everyone.